Let us begin by considering in general the ways in which the economy and the environment are interlinked. So that is why we have this topic today, the economy and the environment. So talking about the economy, it refers to the collection of technological, legal, and social arrangement through which individuals in the society seek to increase their material and spiritual well-being. Others define this as the process or system by which goods and services are produced, sold, and bought in different countries or regions. So there are two elementary economic functions pursued by the society. Economic functions, pursued by the society are production and distribution. So when we talk about production, of course, it all refers to activities that determine the quantities of goods and services that are being produced. While distribution refers to the goods and services that are divided and distributed among the individuals and groups. So the final utilization of these services, katong distribution of goods to individuals, households, or organization, is termed as consumption. So any economic system exists within the natural world, and any processes and changes are governed by the laws of nature. So the production and consumption activities produce waste products. So this waste product is called residual, and sooner they will find their way back in the natural world. So depending on how they are handled, these residuals may lead to pollution or the degradation of our natural environment. So we can illustrate these fundamental functions, a fundamental relationship with this simple schematic, no? So we have this A, the link mark A represent the raw material. So ato ang nature, ato ang environment. So the raw materials flowing into the production and consumption. So the study of the nature in its role as a provider of a raw material is what we call the natural economics. So actually there are different disciplines includes or under the natural economics. So we have mineral economics. So commonly they want to know how to explore the minerals, what are the appropriate rate in which extraction of ore from a mine. And then we also have natural land economics. So how the people in the private sectors make decisions about the use of the land. And then we also have energy economics. So included both water economics, and also we have agricultural economics. So the link label B shows the impact of economic activity on the quality of our natural environment. So the study naman po for the residual flow and its resultant impacts in the environment comes under the heading of the environmental economics. So this diri mo sulod sa environmental economics, no, ang mga studies nato on the impact of this pollution, or not pollution, the residuals coming from our production and consumption. So although environmental economics is our major topic here, usually is environmental economics, are the pollution control, but it is not the only one ng gupod. So for example, human beings have many impacts on the environment in different ways. So that are not also related to pollution. So for example, we have this habitat disruption from housing developments and many others. So there are also many ways in which the economy and the environment interact in interdependent. So for example, we have agriculture and the environment. So we know that agriculture provides total of employment in the Philippines, and also they can have a significant impacts on the environment, and can have, of course, can have significant impact on the environment. So while negative impacts are serious and can include pollution, degradation of soil, of course, from using fertilizers, different fertilizers, and then water and air, agriculture can also positively impact the environment. For instance, by, of course, trapping the greenhouse gases within the crops and soils, or mitigating flood risks through the adoption of certain farming practices. So we can browse it online on the different practices for in the farming that can reduce the impact of flooding in the society. So that is why there are also various agencies and organizations work together to build resilient economy. So one example of that organization is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it's an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. Their goal is to shape policies that foster prosperity, equality, opportunity, and well-being for all. So together with the government, policymakers, and citizens, we work on establishing evidence-based international standards. So they work, establishing evidence-based international standards. These economic sectors use the environment in different ways. So I have here three main ways that the economic uses the environment. So of course, environment, a supplier of resources, resource inputs, and then supplier of environment or amenity goods, and then waste sink capacity. So land, we have available resources are land, water, and other raw materials are important inputs to any production. So these resources frequently vary between countries, and also this will affect the country's economy. Some countries have large stocks on minerals, while others have a good arable land. So natural resources can either be renewable, for example, the trees and any plants, and then or non-renewable, of course, example, oil. So this distinction is important. It influences the way the resources have to be managed in production. So these resources are used by the production sector to create goods and services for use by consumers, or as inputs for another part of the production sectors. But in the process, waste products will be produced. As mentioned earlier, it's what we call the residual. So for example, we have a coal used to generate electricity. So as the coal is burned, it produces electricity, but at the same time, carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide are also being produced, and this may have detrimental effects on the environment. Of course, that includes the health of the individuals as well. So when we talk about supplier of environment or amenity goods, many people get enjoyment from the biodiversity that exists in the country, in the world. And this can also be considered as a form of a public consumption of an environmental good. So there are many examples of where the environment provides amenity benefits for society. For example, some countries enjoy beautiful landscape, and the public benefit from this via their associated recreational services and tourism. So for example, siguro si Boracay, so si Bohol. And environmental stocks of trees can offer global services such as climatic regulation, because the trees absorb carbon dioxide, which might otherwise contribute to climate change. So when we talk about water sink capacity, So this is the capacity of the environment to assimilate the waste products of production and consumption and convert them into harmless or ecologically useful products. So the environment is not only affected by waste products, but also by releases of chemicals such as pesticides, paints, lubricants, and many others. This is waste sink capacity also is the capacity, the physical capacity of the land, water, and the atmosphere to absorb waste and is determined by physical factors such as climate, water, rainfall, wind pattern, and geographical locations. So going back to the schematic relationship of economy and environment, so let us consider now the flow of materials in greater detail. So remember that our A here is the raw materials, is the input, and then the output is the impact of the economic activity. So from physics, the law of the conservation of matters assures that in the long run, these two flows, the rate discharge of by the producers and the rate discharge by the consumers must be equal. So input and the output must be equal. So to make these direct comparisons, all flow must be expressed in terms of mass. So mass ng raw materials. So in terms of symbol, it is represented with M equals the rate of the discharge by the producers and the rate of discharge by the consumers. And then to reduce the mass of the residuals disposed of in the natural resources, it is necessary to reduce the quantity of raw materials taken into the systems. So according to the flow diagram, RPD, the rate discharged by the producers plus the rate discharged by the consumer equals the mass of the residuals equals the goods produced by the producers, of course, and plus the rate of the producer. So to make these direct comparisons, all flow must be expressed in terms of mass. So in terms of symbols, it is represented with M, materials input equals the rate of the discharge by the producers plus the rate of the discharge by the consumers. So to reduce the mass of the residuals, disposed in the environment, it is necessary to reduce the quantity of the raw materials taken into the system. So according to the flow diagram, the rate of discharge by the producers plus the rate of the discharge by the consumers equals the materials input, which is the M, and then equals the G. G represents here the goods and the services, plus the residual rate by the producers minus the rate of the recycled by the producers plus the rate of the recycled by the consumers. So this is the equation that represent the reduction of mass of the residual disposed in the environment. So there are essentially three ways of reducing the mass, no, the M. Therefore, the mass residuals discharged into the natural environment. So M here is the mass discharge in the environment. Assuming that the other flow stays the same, we can reduce the residuals discharge by reducing the quantity of goods and services produced in the economy. That's one essential ways of reducing the residual discharge. And then we also have you can reduce the residuals produced by the producers. So production residuals on the other hand. So assuming that the other flows are held constant, this means essentially changing the amounts of production residual produced for a given quantity of output produced. So there are basically two ways in doing this. One is to reduce the residual intensity of production in all sectors of the economy by inventing and adopting new production technologies and practices that leave smaller amounts of residuals per unit of output produced. A great example for this is the pollution prevention or the source reduction approach. So the other one is to shift the composition of final output. Therefore, this will reduce sectors that have relatively high residuals per unit of output and expand those sectors that produce relatively few residuals per unit of output. So it is commonly termed or called as the sectoral shift. So of course, the third way of reducing residuals is possibly the recycling. Instead of discharging production and consumption residuals in the environment, we can recycle it back to the production process. Right. So I guess that's the end for the economy and the environment. I'll have to discuss in another video about the pollutants, which is also, I think, part of the economy, the relationship of economy and environment. So remember that to reduce the residual flows into the environment, we must reduce materials taken from the environment. All right.